Department of Public Service and Public Service Commission staff. Again, we won't be capturing verbatim, but we will be capturing that in terms of notes, and we will be sharing those notes with everyone on today's call before providing that to our DPS colleagues. There are two options that folks can use for asking questions today. The first, I'm going to start from the bottom up. The first is through the chat feature, which you will see on the lower right portion of your WebEx window. You have the option of typing in any questions or comments at any point during the webinar today through that chat feature, which will be captured. You also have the option of raising your hand if you would prefer to speak when we get to the facilitated Q&A portion, again, around 11:45 or so. And through that option, we would ask that you click the raise hand icon, which is located near your name in the attendee panel. And you'll see an arrow pointing to where that would be located. Keep your hand raised until you're called upon. We'll then go ahead and unmute you. And then when you've concluded with answering your question or providing your comment, we would ask that you again click the raise hand icon to lower your hand. I'll note we are planning to get through as many questions as we can today. If we're not able to get to everyone that has their hand raised, you'll also see information coming up of how you can reach out to us for any one-on-one conversations. Let's move to the next slide, please. Again, to reiterate the objectives that were included in the meeting invite, first is to provide an overview of the goals and the proposed components of the storage roadmap. And then the second is to continue the conversation seeking input from disadvantaged community residents, from environmental justice community stakeholders, and community-based organizations on the proposed roadmap design and related considerations for subsequent program design. And we'll talk more about the timeline and what the opportunities for continued engagement look like. Let's advance to the next slide, please. We're going to begin with just some foundational information given the wide breadth of organizations and individuals who are on today's call, with a little bit of background on the definition, benefits, and types of installations on what we mean by energy storage. The team will then talk about the background in developing the storage roadmap that is currently proposed and was presented to DPS and PSC. They'll go into proposed procurement approaches and program design considerations by sector, and they'll explain what we mean by sector so that it's clear in terms of the types of installations and use cases. And then we'll move into some specific areas that the team would like to get input related to DAC and EJ benefits and design. By no means are those exhausted. We will welcome input, comments, and questions on any areas. And then finally, we'll talk about what comes next in terms of the roadmap review by the Public Service Commission, and then the timing on program design, as well as opportunities for light to moderate to heavy touch in terms of that engagement, depending on interest. And with that, if we could advance to the next slide. And at this point, I am going to turn the mic over to Shyam Mehta from our DER team. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning, everybody. And thank you for making the time to attend this webinar. As Jason mentioned, my name is Shyam Mehta. I'm an assistant director at NYSERDA and part of NYSERDA's energy storage program teams, as well as our distributed solar and distributed energy resource teams. So before we get into the substance of the roadmap proposals and how they pertain to disadvantaged community and environmental justice considerations and benefits, as Jason mentioned, just given the breadth of the audience here, want to spend a little bit of time doing some level setting and overview about what we mean when we are saying energy storage here, particularly from the point of view of the roadmap scope and proposals, and also why the roadmap matters and why energy storage matters, i.e. talking about some of the needs and benefits relating to energy storage. So first of all, let's just talk about what we mean when we say energy storage. I think most folks are probably familiar generally with the term. It's a term for a group of technologies, a group of very different technologies that at their heart all are capable of storing electric energy, i.e. charging for, and then discharging to generate that electricity or produce that electricity at a later time. And probably the most popular and well-known example of that today is lithium-ion batteries and battery technology in general. But as far as the energy storage roadmap and the proposed programs are concerned, really they're meant to be agnostic or and open to all a number of eligible technologies over and above battery storage. So those can include, for example, a group of technologies that come under what we call thermal storage that that store heat that is then can be converted into electricity. Pumped hydro, which is basically hydroelectricity, where the charging, quote unquote, is done by lifting water to a very great height and then using that potential energy to produce electricity, as well as what is also called compressed air storage, and a number of other technologies, some of which are under development today. But functionally, they all do the same thing, which is charge or store energy for later use and generation of electric energy. Now, it's important to mention that as far as the energy storage roadmap is concerned, the focus of this roadmap that we're talking about today is focused on what we call stationary storage. So, in other words, not storage that is contained in e-bikes, for example, or electric vehicles, which also have storage potential because they have batteries, and they have potentially interesting applications in terms of being able to perform charging and discharging for grid benefit functions as well. But really, as far as the roadmap is concerned, we're going to be limiting the focus, or as it's proposed to limit the focus on stationary storage applications. So these are basically, either residential batteries or commercial storage systems, or even very, very large utility scale, what we call bulk storage systems. And in comparison to some of the mobile storage applications, like say e-bikes, the stationary systems generally have pretty sophisticated software controls regarding their operation, and also the siting, permitting, and approval, both of the projects themselves as well as the vendors that manufacture the equipment, like the batteries, for example, is subject to quite stringent regulations and approvals from multiple entities. So for New York City, for example, those include, the FDNY, the Department of Buildings, as well as Department of City Planning that regulates zoning for these stationary energy systems. So quite a bit different from mobile applications, and that's particularly pertinent given some of the concerns that have percolated given the spate of fires recently in New York City pertaining to e-bikes. So with that bit of level setting in terms of what we're talking about, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about why energy storage matters. So talking about the need and benefits. And I'm going to start that discussion by, first of all, talking about these benefits on looking at sort of general benefit categories, and then talk about these same benefits under the lens of different application types or market segments. So the first category of benefits would fall under what we would call those pertaining to enabling grid decarbonization. So as folks may know or would know, 2019, we passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act in New York, also known as the Climate Law, and that has enshrined some quite ambitious mandates and targets as far as electric sector decarbonization, as well as economy-wide decarbonization. So we are now committed legislatively to a path of 100% electric sector decarbonization by 2040, and then near total economy-wide decarbonization by 2050. And to achieve those deep decarbonization goals, we will need a lot of renewable energy, and primarily in the form of solar and land-based and offshore wind in New York's context. And solar and wind, they are clean, obviously, but they are also intermittent or variable in that they only produce energy when the resource, the solar or the wind resource is there. And sometimes that's more than the grid can handle. And sometimes when the resource is not there, they're not producing energy. Like, for example, where I live in Buffalo, you will not see the sun for, sometimes a week at a time. So when we move to this deeply decarbonized future, we're going to need storage in this situation or in this scenario to help shift the renewable energy output from times where it is in excess and not needed to other times when the resource is actually not performing and when it is needed. And that would be across hours of the day, as well as days of the week, weeks of the year, weeks of the month, and then even months of the year when we're talking about longer duration storage. So that's what we mean when we say firming or smoothing variable renewable energy. It's really shifting that solar and wind generation and help making it more firm or dispatchable to serve demand when it's needed. On top of that, in terms of grid decarbonization, storage also helps replace fossil fuel plants, which we will need to retire as part of the decarbonization pathway, both in terms of reducing their emissions by replacing or displacing the generation of fossil fuels, particularly fossil fuel peaker plants, as well as replacing fossil fuel plants that are needed for grid reliability needs. When we say reliability, it's basically contingencies of needing plants to be online in case of grid faults or other plants going offline. So there also storage is basically a zero carbon resource from a reliability perspective. So those are all benefits related to grid decarbonization. The second category of benefits is what I'd call grid services or grid benefits that help lower grid costs, and ultimately that translates into lower electric bills for ratepayers. And storage does that by being able to maximize solar and wind generation. So as I mentioned before, there are certain times when the solar or the wind plant is producing so much energy that the grid can't actually absorb it at that time. And if it weren't for storage, the system operator would or the utility would have to curb the output or reduce the output of the solar or wind plant to be able to manage the grid. And that's a waste of energy that ultimately increases the costs of electricity for everybody, for all ratepayers. So storage can help prevent that. It can help prevent these curtailments or reduce the curtailments and maximize generation of solar and wind, and ultimately help result in savings for ratepayers. Storage can also reduce peak demand, which there are times of the year, right now in the summer, when on very, very hot days, when demand spikes during certain hours of the day or even briefer times. And that actually results in a lot of stress to the transmission and distribution system, to the grid, and also results in needing to add a lot more cost to have infrastructure online to meet those very, very brief periods of peak demand. So storage can help reduce peak demand and therefore reduce the strain and the cost relating to transmission distribution infrastructure. The third category of benefits is storage that is sited on site, either for residences or for businesses or nonprofits, like let's say, critical infrastructure for a hospital or a food bank or a supermarket, where you have on-site resilient power. So basically, it's an alternative to having a diesel generator in case the grid fails, backup power basically. And it's at the very least, it's a cleaner option than having a diesel generator, even if the grid is not completely clean, and that's where you're getting that you're charging your storage from. It's still a lot cleaner than using diesel generator. So that's the third category of benefit, just on-site resilient backup power. And then finally, storage can also provide customer bill savings by maximizing the value of solar if you have residential solar or business has or an institution has on-site solar, it can help you get more bang for your buck um, uh, from that solar system by optimizing the operation of the solar system to produce energy when it's more valuable. And then also for community storage, which has been the which is a model that the Public Service Commission has authorized over the last 5-6 years. Just like community solar, community under the community distributed generation model, um, community storage revenues can be shifted to provide bill credits and bill discounts for subscribers of those systems. So there's a whole different class of benefits under this lens. Now, if you can move to the next slide, I want to talk about um, these benefits under the lens of the different kind of applications as well as or market segments that are really key as far as stationary storage is concerned and that the roadmap focuses on. So when we talk about stationary storage in terms of installation types or applications, it's really three different types. One is you got residential storage, which is basically functionally home batteries. These are smaller systems. Of course, you can see an example of a Tesla Powerwall here, generally less than 25 kilowatts. And again, the main benefit there of residential storage is on-site resilient power. There are some other benefits I'll get into a second after we go through this segment look. Then we also have what we call commercial retail storage segment, which is either systems that are installed on site at, again, businesses, nonprofits, other institutions, and these can be projects up to 5 megawatts in size generally. And I differentiate commercial retail between, once again, on-site retail, on-site storage, which is really meant to, again, provide backup power primarily, versus what we call off-site systems, which are predominantly these community storage systems I mentioned a little while back, where the power is exported or injected into the grid. So it's not providing backup power, it's injecting power into the grid and providing different class of benefits. And then finally, the third segment or application type or installation type is what we would call utility scale or bulk storage, is what the roadmap refers to. And these are very, very large plants, 20 megawatts in size, spanning multiple acres. And they are generally connected to the transmission system and provide a different class of benefits. So just when we look at these three market segments, I think that's another way of looking at or assigning benefits that storage provides under the lens of different installation types. So, so the way I think about it is for residential and on-site commercial retail, that's basically on-site resilient backup power that it is at the very least cleaner than a diesel generator. It can maximize the value of your on-site solar if you have it. It can save you from consuming electricity when prices are higher if you're on a time of use rate. And you may also get paid for grid services like demand response or load management if your utility has a program like that. For example, PSEG on Long Island has a program, a dynamic load management program, that allows residential storage to get paid by providing services that help reduce demand during critical times. And then, so that's residential and on-site commercial storage. And then when you look at off-site commercial storage and bulk storage, there the benefits are really around shifting and firming renewable generation across the day and potentially also across the week, month, or year to eliminate reliance on fossil fuels, helping to maximize solar and wind output, i.e. reduce curtailment to save costs for everybody, reducing the strain and cost to run the transmission and distribution systems, and that has benefits from both safety and cost perspective, offsetting and reducing peaker production and emissions, reducing reliance on peakers from a reliability perspective, and then also generating bill credits for customers under the community storage model. So with that bit of overview out of the way, I think we can move on to talking about the roadmap. So if you move to the next slide. So just some background around why the roadmap was developed and filed in the first place. So just going back a little bit, in 2018, New York adopted an administrative target of 3,000 megawatts or 3 gigawatts of storage deployment by 2030. That target then became enshrined into the climate law through its passage as a legislative mandate of 3 gigawatts by 2030. And coming out of that initial administrative target back in 2018, the NYSERDA and DPS, the Department of Public Service, jointly filed a New York's first storage roadmap, what is called referred as the 2018 storage roadmap, to chart a path towards that 3 gigawatt by 2030 target. And so through the programs that were implemented and approved to support that target, we've so far managed to procure about 1.3 gigawatts of storage across the state. Now, after that, as I mentioned, the Climate Act was passed, and there was a lot of analysis done, what's called the integration analysis, to support the CLCPM mandates to get a better sense of exactly what policy changes would be necessary to achieve the CLCPM mandates regarding electric sector and economy or decarbonization. And in that analysis and modeling work, there was a clear need identified for a significantly higher volume of storage relating to the outer year decarbonization goals we have. So for 2040, if we wanted to get to 100% renewable electric sector, the analysis found that around 12 gigawatts of energy storage would be needed to support that. And then 2050, by which time we need to hit on near total economy-wide decarbonization, supported by the electrification of buildings and transportation, more than 17 gigawatts would be needed. So that's a lot more than 3, obviously. And so recognizing that there was that more needed to be done sooner, and to also create a glide path towards these longer term, these larger targets in 2040 and 2050, that 3 gigawatt target was expanded in last year through the State of the State address by Governor Hochul from 3 gigawatts to 6 gigawatts for 2030. And then as part of that announcement, NYSERDA and the Department of Public Service were also directed to file an updated roadmap to propose additional programs and funding and policy recommendations to chart a path to that 6 gigawatt goal. So that roadmap, the 2022 roadmap, was finally filed late last year for consideration and ruling by the Public Service Commission, and we are currently in the public comment period for this roadmap. So hopefully that's a little bit of useful background about the roadmap itself. So now let's jump in, let's move to the next slide and talk about some of the roadmap's actual proposals. If you can move to the next slide. Great, thank you. So at the very top line, as I mentioned, we are at a point right now where the state has procured through various programs about 1.3 gigawatts of storage. So in terms of achieving that 6 gigawatt target, and I should mention the bulk of that 1.3 gigawatt procurement is still being constructed and developed and built out today. Up to this point, we've actually deployed about 300 megawatts of storage statewide. So, but with 1.3 gigawatts procured, that would leave another 4.7 gigawatts or 4,700 megawatts to be procured and deployed across the state to hit that 6 gigawatt target. So that's exactly what the roadmap proposes and focuses on, saying, okay, we need to procure another 4,700 megawatts. We need to do it across these 3 key market segments. And so the table you see on your screen here shows you the roadmap's proposed procurements by those 3 market segments. So for the largest procurement is proposed to be allocated to the bulk sector, given the decarbonization and grid benefits, as well as the peak reduction potential benefits that bulk storage has. So out of that 4,700 megawatts, 3,000 megawatts is proposed to be allocated to the bulk sector, and that will be procured through, or proposed to be procured through, a series of annual solicitations, competitive solicitations, much like NYSERDA does for large-scale solar and wind and offshore wind. Secondly, the retail storage segment, which is again a combination of on-site storage, commercial storage, and off-site storage, 1.5 gigawatts or 1,500 megawatts was allocated out of that additional 4,700 megawatt allocation to this segment. And in terms of, again, how to procure and the incentive structure that would be supporting these procurements, the roadmap proposes it will be done through a standard offer program, i.e. Not a competitive solicitation, much along the lines of what we had previously with previous roadmap programs, and even how New York Sun, the distributed solar incentive program, is structured. And that would be incentivized through an upfront fixed rate incentive, as we've done previously. And then finally, the roadmap also proposes a statewide residential storage procurement program um, at allocating 200 megawatts for that segment. Again, similar to the commercial retail program, is proposing to do so through a standard offer program, a fixed rate upfront incentive, which if storage prices decline over time, as we hope they do, would be also a declining block where successive capacity blocks would be lower rates. Again, assuming that we see reduction in costs over the course of time. So that 3,000 megawatts of bulk, 1,500 megawatts of commercial retail, and 200 megawatts of residential add up to 4,700 megawatts. We can provide a little bit more or as much detail as folks need in terms of the calculus behind why these numbers are at the levels they are. There is a lot of work that had to be done in terms of investigating the technical potential for each of these segments and what they could actually contribute realistically over the next 7 to 8 years. And we can get into that in the Q&A if there's interest. But for right now, let's move to the next slide and talk about some general considerations as far as the proposed roadmap programs are concerned before we move on to disadvantaged community and environmental justice related considerations and benefits. So first of all, in terms of geographical considerations, the roadmap does find that there is value to supporting storage projects across the state. But that said, the roadmap does recommend a heavy focus on the downstate region, because both from the analysis perspective for grid needs, decarbonization needs, there is a significant benefit and need for a large proportion of storage, bulk storage especially, to be deployed in the downstate region to support the integration of offshore wind and also help reduce or displace fossil fuel peakers, because the vast majority, if not all of New York State's peaking plants are located in that downstate region. So the roadmap does propose a heavy focus on the downstate region, as I said, for the bulk programs, and suggests that could be done through an explicit carve out or a binding target for how much should be procured downstate, i.e. in New York City and or Long Island. And then for the residential and retail programs, the roadmap straightforwardly proposes implementing region-specific carve-outs or blocks, just as was done for the previous roadmap program. So for the previous commercial retail programs that are now fully allocated coming out of the first roadmap, we had different carve-outs or blocks for different regions. And so for the last iteration, it was New York City was one block, Westchester was another, Long Island was another, and rest of state was another. Secondly, in terms of considerations with regard to duration, so storage, there are different durational profiles for different storage technologies, all the way from 2 hours to at the very least 8 hours and potentially even longer. So given the need that was identified in the analysis supporting the roadmap and the benefits for longer duration storage, i.e. more than 4 hours, the roadmap does recommend giving NYSERDA flexibility to have specific carve-outs again for specific durations. It doesn't propose explicitly that there be duration specific carve-outs, but it does, and actually stakeholders are encouraged to comment on whether that's preferable, but it does leave the door open for doing that if it is deemed important enough. And then finally, on the labor side, consistent with other NYSERDA programs, the roadmap does recommend that projects that have a capacity of 1 megawatt or higher do pay New York State prevailing wage as a contractual requirement. If you move to the next slide. So now we're going to talk about the roadmap's proposals as they relate to disadvantaged communities and environmental justice benefits, which is really the focus of today's webinar. So just again, level setting wise, our North Star is the mandates that are enshrined in the CLCPA. And the CLCPA has actually two different mandates that pertain to storage. One is a general mandate, which is requiring the state to invest or direct resources to ensure that disadvantaged communities receive at least 35% of the overall benefits of spending, of program spending, with a goal of 40%. So that applies to all of NYSERDA's programs that are clean energy oriented. But then for storage, there is a specific mandate on top of that, which is that the CLCP requires the Public Service Commission to specify that a minimum percentage of projects, storage projects, should A, deliver clean energy benefits into zones, NISO zones that serve disadvantaged communities, and that storage projects should be deployed explicitly to reduce the usage of fossil fuel peaker plants that are located in or near disadvantaged communities. So that's also something we have to be very mindful of. Now, the last thing I'll say here is that we talked about how the benefits that storage provides are different when it comes to on-site storage, whether that's residential or commercial, versus off-site storage, whether that's commercial or large scale, i.e. bulk. So given those different types of benefits for on-site versus off-site, the roadmap does propose different approaches when it comes to program design considerations for benefits relating to disadvantaged communities and environmental justice communities. And if you move to the next slide, I'll get straight into that. So, okay, the roadmap, one thing to note is that the roadmap's proposals for DAC and EJ benefits are fairly high level. They give a lot of room for stakeholders to provide comment and input. And in fact, there are questions, it explicitly tees up questions requesting stakeholder input on how programs should be designed to achieve these ends. But what it does say, again, just reiterating what I said from the last slide, which is the types of benefits that on-site versus off-site / bulk provides are quite different. And so keeping that in mind, on-site retail as well as on-site residential as well as commercial retail projects, they provide direct local benefits to the site at which they're installed, right? It's backup power for that site, for that business, for that home, for that residence. The value of those projects are really primarily for the benefit of the site owners. So given that, the roadmap recommends quite commonsensically that the retail and the on-site programs, on-site retail and residential programs should be designed so that at least 35% of the funding and the benefits of these projects are directed to projects actually sited in disadvantaged communities. However, for the bulk and off-site retail segments or programs, as I mentioned there previously, storage in the context of these applications really is delivering services to the transmission and distribution systems across a wider geographic area and providing wider ranging benefits. So it's not necessarily the exact physical location of the project that determines where the benefit is provided to. So retail projects would be ostensibly be benefiting not just the zip code that it was built in, it would be the benefits in terms of distribution costs, reduction, distribution investment with deferral would be on a territory-wide basis. For a larger scale bulk project, those benefits would be experienced and driven not even just on a territory basis, but across the entire NISO zone that it would be sited in. So keeping this in mind, the roadmap recommends that instead of having a site-based requirement, that it's when it comes to DAC and EJ benefits, that at least 35% of the bulk and offsite retail program funding is utilized to support projects cited in areas of the state, which is consistent with the CLCPA language, with the highest benefits to DACs as well as peaker reductions. Now, what are these areas of the state? As I mentioned before, they can be found in various locations across the state, but New York City, given its high concentration of peakers as well as disadvantaged communities, is proposed by the roadmap to receive a particular focus in program design, which the potential of an explicit carve out for New York City. Next slide, please. So those are really the roadmaps. What I went over the last slide is the exact language from the roadmap when it comes to what it says about a program design from to provide benefits to disadvantaged communities and environmental justice matters. Now, in terms of the feedback that the roadmap tees up for stakeholders and that we're looking for from DAC and EJ stakeholders as part of this webinar, just want to give you a little bit more specificity to help guide your feedback and comments. And the roadmap actually tees up these questions explicitly. So the first one is for bulk and offsite commercial projects. The question again is, it's a very open-ended question, which is, how should programs and procurements be designed to make sure that at least 35% of that proposed program funding ends up being utilized to benefit disadvantaged communities and also drive speaker plant emissions beyond just a program focus on New York City. And so what are examples of program design that could achieve these goals? These are just illustrative examples. One is, as the roadmap suggests, there could be an explicit binding carve out for projects cited in New York City, i.e. Zone J, i.e. either X% of the bulk target or the retail target, or in terms of exact megawatts. Second, another example is as part of the scoring or evaluation process in the competitive solicitation for the large scale storage projects, we could incorporate a criterion, a non-price criterion that is related to the project's potential to reduce peaker plant operation and emissions. That's another way to achieve that end. And then finally, when it comes to community solar that I mentioned before, another potential idea is have utilities enroll on an opt-out basis their LMI or energy affordability program customers directly into participating community storage towards receiving bill credits or bill discounts. This is currently, we currently have a version of this program that is specific to community solar in national grid territory. It is being considered by the Department of Public Service for a statewide rollout. It's called Expanded Solar for All. So one way to extend this program so that storage can also provide these benefits is to make storage an eligible technology in this Expanded Solar for All program. So that way, for example, all of Con Ed's EAP customers would be enrolled into community storage on an opt-out basis, and they would, once they did so, they would start receiving benefits in the form of bill discounts. And then, as I mentioned, now moving on to on-site retail and residential projects, it's a similar question, which is again, how should programs be optimally designed to ensure that at least 35% of the funding and benefits are directed to projects cited in DACs? And again, here, a couple of illustrative examples. One way to do that would be to implement, again, an explicit carve out for projects that are cited in disadvantaged communities and or owned by low and moderate income homeowners or affordable housing providers. A second example would be to provide a higher incentive or an incentive adder for such projects over and above our base incentive for such projects. Potentially, one comment could be, or the feedback provided could be, do both. So again, hopefully this just gives you a little bit of it helps guide the exact areas of feedback that the roadmap is looking for. Of course, it's not restricted to just these questions. Stakeholders are encouraged to provide feedback on any aspects of the roadmap proposals. Everything is fair game. I realize I'm running a little bit behind times, but I think should be wrapping up very quickly. So if you can move to the next slide. All right, I think this is my last slide, which is just want to give folks a bit of information on exactly where we are in the process of the roadmap and next steps and opportunities for future engagement. So as I mentioned, the roadmap was filed late last year and now is open for public comment through the 20th of March. We are coming up on the closure of the comment window. Comments can be filed on DPS's website under case number 18-E-0130. It is fairly intuitive, the process to file comments. If you're having any trouble doing so, we are happy to assist you. And there is an email, my email information is provided, I think, in the next slide. So please feel free to reach out to me if you're having any trouble filing comments. Once that comment period is over and Department of Public Service and Public Service Commission review those comments, deliberate the roadmap proposals, then the Public Service Commission may issue an order, which could either approve the roadmap as filed, it could approve it with some modifications, or it could deny it altogether. And if approved or approved with modifications, the next step would be for NYSERDA to file an implementation plan, which would specify additional program design details, including those, for example, pertaining to program design towards DAC and EJ benefit outcomes. And so just to make it clear, we will be working with stakeholders involved, including CBOs as well as other disadvantaged community stakeholders during the process of implementation plan development, or once we have an order, approving order, assuming we do. And that process will likely run through this summer. There's a little bit difference when it comes to the bulk program versus the residential retail programs. It is likely at this time that the bulk storage program implementation plan would be subject to a similar additional public comment period that the roadmap itself is going through right now, as well as PSC approval. So there will be a longer runway of engagement, a formal engagement, and another public comment period, provide input and feedback regarding the bulk program. For the residential retail program, since we're basically planning on emulating the structure of the broad structure of what was implemented in the previous roadmap, that could be filed without needing commission approval within 30 to 60 days of an approving order from the commission. Now, that said, once if we have an approving order, there will be opportunities for engagement one-on-one at the very least, if not through written feedback and other channels, to provide for you all to provide feedback even on the residential retail program implementation plans. And I think the next slide gets into that. But again, once those implementation plans are finalized with the input of stakeholders, then NYSERDA would finally implement those final approved program designs, put money on the street, launch new programs, and roll them out as the last step there in this process. So I think that is all from me, and I'll turn things back over to, I believe, Jason or members of his team to take you through the last couple of slides before we move to the Q&A and discussion section of this webinar.
Thanks, Shyam. And again, feel free if you'd like to either use the raise hand feature, which is over next to your name in the attendee list, or the chat feature in the bottom right. And as folks are considering that and inputting comments, Shyam, would you just take a moment and go through your anticipated timing, your best estimate that you just did for the different programs? I know there was a lot to unpack there. If you could just take a moment and just remind for those on the call what the development timeline looks like in launch.
Yeah, sure thing is. And so I'm definitely we're in the realm of guesstimation here, since this is ultimately under the purview of the Public Service Commission. But very roughly, as I mentioned, the comment period for the roadmap closes on the 20th of March. I would expect the review of those comments and then deliberation around the roadmap proposals to get into at least the April to May timeframe. So sometime I would say in Q2 is when we could expect, the second quarter of this year is when we could expect a roadmap order. If we get an approving roadmap order, as I mentioned, the next step for the retail and residential programs would be file that implementation plan, which would be 1 to 2 months after that. So the hope is that with those programs, we could relaunch those programs and get money on the street and roll things out, perhaps by Q3, at least by the end of this year. For the bulk program, the competitive solicitation program, as I mentioned, that is likely to go through another formal public comment period and a commission review and approval. So there, the hope is that all of that is able to take place over the course of this year to then set us up for running that first competitive solicitation sometime at the beginning of next year.
Okay, thank you.
Jason, I'm
Looks
sorry,
like
I think
the
we may have skipped one slide right before this that just gives folks some information on how they can engage further. Okay, so I'm happy to just go over this before we move to Q&A discussion. So just reiterating next steps in terms of capturing feedback. So as Michelle mentioned, we are capturing feedback provided in this webinar. We will be capturing that, sending everybody a summary to ensure the comments were captured accurately. And then once we do that, we will be then taking the feedback and comments presented here to Department of Public Service and the Public Service Commission for their review and deliberation. So rest assured, your feedback will be heard. At the same time, strongly encourage you to still submit written comments to make sure you have there's a paper trail on the record. And as I mentioned, those can be filed on the DPS's website. You can contact me. My email is on this slide in case you're having trouble with filing comments. And then also, if you want to further engage during this time frame or any other time frame, really, you are absolutely free to contact me to set up a one-on-one meeting with our team to schedule any follow-up meetings regarding any of the topics that were raised on today's webinar. As I mentioned, there will be likely an additional public comment period relating to the filing of the bulk program. So there will be more opportunity to provide comment and feedback there. And then finally, you may also provide informal written feedback on NYSERDA regarding the residential retail program design considerations, because there will likely not be another public comment period there. So happy to just receive informal written feedback on top of any one-on-one engagement following the roadmap order and before the publication of that implementation plan.
Okay, thank you. Number of comments are being submitted under the chat feature. Those are viewable for anyone on this webinar. It looks like the first question that came in, and Shyam, I'll direct, I think, probably the majority of these to you, unless it's obvious that it's best served for somebody else. But if we could begin, there was a question that came in asking if we have reviewed lessons learned from the New York Prize microgrid program. And I will assume that within that answer, the question is in any impact on program design features for the areas that you discussed.
Yeah, and Jason, this is David. To Shyam's defense, that was long before his time at NYSERDA. I don't know if Skylar wants to jump in on this, but you know, the microgrid situation has a lot more involvement with other technologies and coordination, where storage is one technology. So we didn't really see a comparison to look at maybe what could have gone wrong or what did go wrong with the New York Prize compared to the energy storage. They're sort of apples and oranges, in my opinion there.
And if you could speak a little bit about how the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act funding changes to tax credits are factoring into broader program design, including for the LMI components.
Sure. Skylar, if I could defer to you to answer this question while I actually take a quick water break.
Sure. So we've incorporated the investment tax credit for energy storage that's within the Inflation Reduction Act in all of our modeling efforts. We've also explored with other entities, including developers, utilities, and other state entities, what the best way to approach other funding through the federal government would be. We're keeping all of our options open. There's a lot of exciting opportunities through EPA, DOE, and a couple of the bills that have been passed. But to a certain extent, we think the ITC for storage for individual projects is probably the best option right now for projects to apply for. Some of the other adders that other resources might be eligible for don't apply to storage. So that's something that we're keeping an eye on and maybe doing some advocacy for. But we're definitely evaluating, what's the best way to either assist storage in grabbing that money from the IRA or incorporating it into our program funding costs.
And Skylar, for those on the audience who were really familiar in the past where storage was not eligible standalone, was only eligible when it was paired and charged by solar, could you just touch upon the highlights of what fundamentally changed as part of the new?
Yeah, sure. So as part of the Inflation Reduction Act last year, a new tax credit was created where standalone storage by itself is now eligible for a full 30% investment tax credit. So that's a huge win for storage. There's no constraints now on how it has to pair or be sited with other renewable resources. Storage by itself is now eligible for that full 30% tax credit. One wrinkle we have here is that storage companies themselves have not in the past been the entities applying for and receiving that tax credit. So that's why I was referring before about how New York State and especially the Green Bank were trying to push for new products, new processes to help storage projects access that when they might not be familiar with tax equity financing and things like that.
I think if I could take one, I think it's more a comment than a question, Jason. So I think, we talked about site-based criteria for benefit eligibility, and there's a couple of comments we got there. One is, I'm just going to read the comment, which is, it's important to note that large storage units shouldn't be primarily sited on DAC land, although it's useful to the community. Vacant land within a DAC could be reprioritized for affordable housing / green space accessibility rather than creating another eyesore for the community. And that these storage units could be sited in different locations where the DAC could still access 35 to 40% of benefits. So, I think that just based on, what we went through in terms of the way we see storage providing benefits, I think we would agree with that comment that when it comes to especially larger storage units, we don't see a direct, when it comes to offsite commercial as well as bulk, i.e. large scale storage systems, there isn't a direct, benefit from siting them on disadvantaged community land or in those exact zip codes. And so, and that would also significantly constrain where storage could effectively be sited from an interconnection and permitting standpoint. So I think that is a just a great point, and it's certainly something we are very cognizant of as we move into the program design phase.
Leslie, I'm going to ask your question and just add a little bit of context that I suspect is intended, but by all means, feel free to raise your hand and we'll unmute you if you'd like. And I know we had a brief discussion earlier about microgrids, but specifically when we're talking about energy storage being cited to provide, say, resiliency benefits within a community center, for example, obviously the storage is time limited with how long it can discharge. Wondering if any of the DER team could speak to any consideration that's been given or thinking in lines of pairing storage with some other form of on-site generation so that resiliency benefits are able to be received for a longer period?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Please go for it.
Sure. So we looked at a number of things. First is obviously the pairing of storage with other resources to maintain a more consistent output of power. We've tested some of these ideas on Long Island by incentivizing paired solar and storage for residential homes. That requires the storage to be paired with solar and to be integrated so that you could actually maintain power even during a power outage. We've had a lot of success with that program and plan to roll something similar out statewide, although we may end up making the solar portion optional. So you can just do standalone storage integrated with a home or business and provide resiliency in the instance of a power outage. Another thing we've looked at in the past is how to make kind of fully, quote unquote, fully resilient communities using storage as kind of a base resource in a microgrid. We've run into a lot of cost issues with there. There's a lot of research still going on about ways to control microgrids, way to actually monitor them and make money through microgrids. And what we see today is that there's not really market structures that allow that to pay off, even with a high value assigned to avoiding lost load. And so for a similar amount of renewable and storage build out, we see trying to deploy that as a microgrid as costing almost double what it would cost to just integrate those into the buildings themselves or build community resources that can help individual power lines or substations stay on without taking the full extra step of islanding in a microgrid. So we see that potentially as having value long-term as costs come down, integration gets better, research continues on those control techniques. But right now we find a much bigger bang for our buck by just deploying renewables and storage at scale and boosting reliability and resiliency of the whole grid.
See a number of comments still coming in, which is really helpful. Just want to give an opportunity for any members of the team to speak about resiliency and how that's being viewed. Is that a primary benefit? Is that a secondary consideration?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. It's David. It's interesting to build on what Skylar was talking about. It really depends on where some live. I would assume that when you're in Long Island and you're a residential homeowner, you're looking at resiliency as a primary, need. But the storage is very expensive to fulfill that need, and it's only capable of providing a few hours at best for part of the home power. So it's not always going to provide the homeowner the need that they feel they can get when they realize how much power, how much it could power and how long. So in Long Island, they go through the DLM tariff, and there's a new upcoming opt-out time of use rate that will be able to allow homeowners to not only have the storage for resiliency, which is sort of their first need in their opinion, but it is also going to be able to provide system-wide benefits for the entire utility by providing power when the grid needs it the most and charging when it could most best provide that power. And that's really what we'd like to move forwards with on the residential side, is doing some sort of LIPA agreement that we did with them in Long Island, and a lot more storage in a lot more affordable manner when we're getting benefits than the secondary homeowner would be resilience. I hope that helped.
If I may just add to that, just from a higher level perspective, with the question about resiliency, and where, whether it's a primary or secondary focus. So I think the simple answer to that is for our on-site programs and on-site systems, whether it's a residential system or an on-site system that's serving a food bank or a hospital or a supermarket in a food desert, that resiliency is a primary use case and primary benefit of an on-site storage system. For an off-site system, I would say it's more of a secondary benefit. So for off-site system, again, the benefits we see are particularly around peak reduction, around helping to integrate and maximize the value of solar and wind that we're going to need to install to decarbonize the grid. And then as far as community storage is concerned, it also has the potential to provide bill discounts or bill credits. So I think that's the sort of high level picture in terms of how we prioritize resiliency. It really depends on on-site versus off-site. The other thing I'll say on microgrids is, there isn't an explicit microgrid focused program that is proposed in the roadmap. However, any storage that is installed as part of a microgrid or a microgrid under development would, in theory, be eligible to receive funding from the proposed programs. And then on top of that, we do have existing incentive programs through New York Sun that also support distributed solar. So really, when you think about a microgrid, it's generally a combination, at least as far as I understand it, of solar, storage, perhaps a combined heat and power unit, which is a fossil fuel system, which we're really divesting our support for, and a system of software controls. So we have incentives for solar, and we're proposing, additional incentives for the storage part. So, I think it's a good argument you can make that there's still support through the combination of these programs for microgrid. It's just not explicitly microgrid focused program incentives. And that is definitely something that folks are absolutely encouraged and welcome to comment on if they feel that microgrid should be a focus, an explicit focus of the storage programs.
Okay, while we're moving on to the next question, Leslie, we're going to unmute you after this next question so that you can elaborate on the question that you raised previously. And the question is if you could put numbers to how much of this plan would benefit communities outside of the New York City metro area.
I can take that one. So we don't have full approval or full program design yet for an explicit program breakdown by zone or by region. But what we can focus on is kind of what the modeling has shown us for where we should kind of prioritize storage deployment for maximum system benefit. And what that modeling has shown is that for full decarbonization, we're going to want somewhere between 50 and 65% of all of our energy storage deployments to be in the downstate region, which you can think of as basically Hudson Valley, New York City, and Long Island. And that's primarily for transmission benefits, for decarbonization, trying to offset peaker plants, and integrating offshore wind. And so that's what kind of the models are showing us. That's also where some of the values in terms of grid benefits and revenue streams to pay off the storage, where those revenue streams are highest as well. So, if we try to focus on what the model's showing us, we're going to try to push, a majority of the storage downstate. But what we're really conscious of is trying to make sure we don't lose benefits elsewhere, and we don't overly constrain ourselves to certain projects or certain regions and miss out on good, cheap, cost-effective, high-value projects in other regions. So when we actually move to implementation, we're much more likely to kind of avoid having strict carve-outs for individual zones and just kind of have guidelines for best, most cost-effective projects and score projects on those criteria. But just for the modeling, we see somewhere around 30 to 40% of the storage deployments happening in upstate, at least in this program now. And that's kind of just a baseline that we might try to stick to during our program.
If we'd like to turn the floor to Leslie Vasquez as on the attendee list now. Leslie, if you could explain your question and then elaborate on your comment in the chat. You're now able to speak.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you guys for the responses and for the great presentation. I understand where it's coming, where the response that was given on the siting of these large storage units within disadvantaged communities being the most efficient and the most affordable. But it's also important to note that disadvantaged communities are mostly multifamily homes that are residential and that are owned by landlords. And we've seen that the transition to renewable energy has been a lot more difficult in that sense, in which case having these large sightings of storage units within disadvantaged communities doesn't necessarily make sense at the moment, being that we're still transitioning and that it's very early on in the stages of transitioning to a cleaner economy. Though it is a lot more work to focus on microgrid accessibility, I do see the transition in the next couple of years being unequitable if these large sightings are within disadvantaged communities and the disadvantaged communities themselves aren't able to access that energy storage because they're not fully transitioned to renewable energy. That being said, whenever they are transitioned to renewable energy, other areas of New York City and New York State will have more access, like Long Island, for example, which you guys gave that example of. And so when we do have these microgrid implementations in place, they will be able to get access to that energy storage within disadvantaged communities, rather than the disadvantaged communities themselves, because they cannot afford renewable energy as much as other areas are, if that makes sense. I guess my next question would be how we can make sure that this phenomenon doesn't happen to disadvantaged communities. Because if we do go forward with this current roadmap and with this current strategy, we would just have these large sightings within disadvantaged communities where it would just be an eyesore. And if that vacant land is occupied by something that the community cannot use, then it should be reprioritized for something that benefits them instead, like green space accessibility or affordable housing or resources that could be available to them.
Thanks,
Thank
Leslie.
you, Leslie.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just thinking of taking a first stab at responding there. So Leslie, yeah, so just to clarify, at least as far as the roadmap proposals are concerned, which again are fairly high level, but as far as the larger storage system classes are concerned, i.e. commercial, especially, offsite commercial, and then, really large scale, what we call bulk storage, we are very cognizant of the issue you mentioned. And in fact, we're not proposing that that those systems have to be sited inside of disadvantaged communities to qualify for any kind of benefit eligibility. So rather than a site-based criteria, at a high level, what we're proposing is that those projects should really be evaluated based on the actual benefits that they provide to disadvantaged communities, whether it's economic benefits in the form of bill discounts or bill credits, or in terms of actually driving reduction in the use of fossil fuel peakers that are sited near those disadvantaged communities. So as far as the large scale projects are concerned, I think that we're in agreement there. As far as, again, smaller on-site projects are concerned, we do see a need and a benefit from the site owner actually accruing that benefit, and that's why for on-site commercial storage as well as for residential storage, we have proposed that those projects should be evaluated based on the benefits to the site owner. And that's primarily, again, backup power.
I'm going to combine two questions that were asked that are really related to each other. And the preface is, given the high costs of some of the residential systems, particularly as, for example, a Tesla Powerwall, compared to an LMI household's income or the available income within a disadvantaged community household, for example, whether you've considered pairing any additional adders for additional incentives for, say, residential storage in those locations, especially when it's providing backup power for, say, critical healthcare needs. And then related to that question is whether any additional incentives have been considered for an LMI household that may have electrified itself, that is now integrating with time of use rates. So if you could just speak to the thinking around any adders or any questions that you would like to have the audience think about for comment.
Yeah, Jason, I'll speak to part of that. Much like I think a lot of people might understand, in New York Sun, we have an affordable, a low-income adder on the solar side. And I would definitely, I think we should entertain the similar concept to storage, so that if somebody were to be a low-income household and they want solar plus storage, they would have the base incentive for both and then an adder for both as well to give them better economics.
Shyam or Skylar, anyone like to add anything additional?
I think there was a second half of that question, Jason, around, I'm just capturing the, make sure I capture the question, which is, have you considered additional, well, one is, have you considered an adder or an even higher adder for resi storage, that pertains to, or even commercial storage that pertains to other criteria like medical need for electrically powered equipment? I think that is definitely something that merits consideration, and has come up. And then secondly, have you considered special additional funding for homes that have electrified, particularly to integrate with time of use rates? And that's a really great question or / comment. And again, I mean, the short answer is yes, that is something that we are discussing, including potentially partnering with utilities as well, because the benefits of storage and the use case for storage and the value proposition of storage is significantly enhanced when you have an electrified home that is on a time of use rate. So absolutely, that's something that we are looking at.
We have a few more minutes before I'll transition over to Michael Duranio for wrap up. We do have a question: as an affordable housing developer, whether consideration was put or has been put into incentivizing a per household benefited by the system as opposed to the total system size. And Chris goes on to say, as an unintended consequence, larger apartment complexes could be hurt relative to smaller ones when the incentive is limited to the system size.
Yeah, we haven't thought of it that way, Jason. I'm not sure how you would calculate a benefit, for how many people are in the building, but it's not something we considered or thought about. So if that's something that's important, feel free to put it as a comment.
Yeah, and just to add to that, for residential incentives, they are on kind of a per project basis. For individual entities putting behind the meter kind of storage assets at their facility, that would scale linearly then. So every unit would have the same incentive. So there's no kind of hindrance there to potentially putting in every unit that you might be constructing. That the incentive wouldn't decline, the more units you buy. And for distributed resources, if you're going to act as kind of an anchor tenant and distribute bill credits like other savings and benefits to the people living in those new facilities, it's the same thing. The units will, as you scale the storage, you'll be generating more bill credits, and they can be used with however many people live there, spread out accordingly. So I hope, as we develop programs, we don't create any of these, artificial downsides for some of the different types of developments. But if you still see those existing, please let us know. And like David said, please submit something like that as a comment.
And I would think, Skylar, like the more people that live in a building, the bigger the storage you're anyway is, right? Doesn't it scale? And the greater the incentive will be?
Yes, that's the same for retail and residential, but I'm not sure we're necessarily capturing the part of the question. There might be some disconnect. So we were thinking about unmuting Chris to see if he wants to clarify or ask a follow-up. Okay, Chris, I think you are now unmuted if you wanted to clarify.
Yeah, no, I think you guys kind of covered it. I mean, I'm looking at through the lens of, understanding how the solar incentive is structured. And if I'm, kind of the master tenant, and billing tenants either for their costs or, sub-metering out to them. I know it just declines once you get above a certain, megawatt threshold. And if I have a big apartment complex that I'm renovating, so it's not the most efficient one. If I get above a certain size, then I know that the incentives go down. So just hopeful that that's not the same for storage.
Got it. No, thank you. That's appreciated. Yep.
Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the really well-constructed, insightful comments. We're going to now turn over to Michael Duranio to wrap up and also touch upon ways to continue staying engaged. Michael.
Yeah, thanks everybody again for taking the time to be with us here today and talk about this important new roadmap, which we all know has a lot of implications and potential benefit here for the communities that you are based in and serve. Just want to reiterate that we have recorded this, and the slides that were presented here today will be provided, will be posted actually on our website, the webinar presentation section of our website, NYSERDA's website, which are linked here. We'll be providing a follow-up email that provides that link to all of you, so you don't need to wonder where that is and wonder when it's posted, etc. Just again, want to also reiterate that Shyam's offer to have any follow-up discussions one-on-one with anybody that was on this call. You can take his email down right here and follow up directly with Shyam with any questions that you have. We back to the point about appreciating your time. We are at NYSERDA we value that. We appreciate that you have other competing priorities and that your contributions are really critical to us achieving our goals. And so as a result, for those organizations, in particular those that are those community-based organizations that are based in and principally serve disadvantaged communities, we are able to offer a reimbursement for your participation in this webinar today as a recognition of that contribution and your expertise and your understanding of the issues that disadvantaged communities face and that we know is critical to us at NYSERDA achieving our goals. So we will be following up with additional detail for those that are eligible. There will be additional detail on how to know if you are eligible, but generally speaking, if you are a community-based organization that principally serve, in other words, more than 50% of your services are directed to those in disadvantaged communities, you will likely be eligible for that reimbursement. So I think like's been said, this is hopefully that's just a first step in offering space for comments and questions, and we will be, as Jason mentioned, providing a follow-up with clarification on the questions that we have received and the responses that we've provided. I think that about covers our presentation for today. I think if there's, again, just want to thank everybody for your time and look forward to being in touch.